vegetation post-logging, and that abiotic understories that are altered by selective logging and elephant trails impact seedling performance in these Gabonese tropical forests where I work. And so I'm just going to walk you through a little bit about like how I come up with this as a research question and what I did to test the questions that I had and come to this result. Yeah, I was really interested in studying African tropical forests for my PhD. I find African tropical forests super interesting, and they're a little bit weird if you compare them to some other tropical forests. So forests in this Central Africa Congo Basin region have really high carbon storage and lower diversity when you compare them to tropical forests in South America and in Southeast Asia. And one of the reasons for this is because Congo Basin tropical forests tend to have lower stem density and higher abundances of large trees. So there's fewer trees, but more big ones. And this type of forest structure explains why these forests store more carbon compared to other tropical regions. And this is also why it's hugely important to understand, first of all, how this forest structure is naturally maintained in these African tropical forests, and also how we can help to manage these forests. One of the reasons that we as humans need to help manage these forests is because they're under a huge amount of economic pressure. And I'm just going to show you some of this in the context in Gabon. So we're going to see the country in the world with almost 90% forest cover, which is everything in green in the background of this map. And this makes it an excellent place to look at some of the ecological processes that determine things like carbon storage and biodiversity in Congo Basin forests. And if you look on this map, the yellow outlined zones here are the country's protected areas. And everything outside the protected areas outlined in red is representative of a forest that is leased to a logging concession. So it's not quite the entirety of the forest area outside of protected areas, but logging permits do cover about 60% of the land area in Gabon. And logging is currently hugely affecting much of Gabon's forests and will continue to into the future. Now, in Gabon, logging started in the 1800s, and this high level of forest cover has been maintained ever since then. So it does seem like Gabon has been doing something right in terms of sustainable forest management in these log forests in Gabon. Generating land use and profit-generating land uses are usually cited as the thing that is the biggest threat to tropical forests globally. And selective logging is sort of a special type of profit-generating land use because it's seen by many people as a compromise in terms of the land use. So it generates income, but it doesn't completely clear forests from the land. So in comparison to something like mining or developing commercial agriculture or putting in something like an oil palm concession, those would all completely clear these forests from the land. And when you selectively log a forest, you're going into forests and cutting down and plucking out those timber species. And so while you are felling trees across the forest landscape, canopy cover remains disturbed but largely intact. And I wanted to study this selective logging disturbance in Gabon, so I chose this one particular logging concession here in yellow on the map. And then I set up a vegetation plot network to look at the impacts of selective logging on things like biodiversity, carbon storage, ecosystem services, logging sustainability, and forest dynamics. And I will note that in this logging concession, they have a really, really low logging rate. So they're removing 1 to 2 trees per hectare. And this is one of the lowest logging rates in the world, and this logging rate is common across Congo Basin forests. If you compare it to the average logging rates in South America or Southeast Asia, those logging rates are much higher. South America has, I think, an average logging rate of 5 to 6 trees removed per hectare. And then in Southeast Asia, it's normally at 8 trees per hectare. So this is very, very low on the global scale of selective logging disturbance. And I'm just going to summarize really quickly some of the patterns that we found in terms of biodiversity and ecosystem services and how they're affected in these logged forests. So we found that in the logged forests compared to unlogged forests, they had similar levels of carbon storage. So these log forests are maintaining high carbon storage. We also found similar or higher levels of biodiversity. So in some of the log forests, we found that the biodiversity of the seedlings and the saplings was actually higher than in the unlogged forests, but we didn't find evidence of biodiversity loss. We also found that timber species regeneration was supported. There were a few particular timber species that had lower regeneration rates in the log forest compared to the unlogged forests. And we think that that just has something to do with the particular regeneration requirements of the species. But overall, if you're looking at the number of timber individuals that are regenerating in the forest, it's similar as in unlogged forests. And then we also found that there were similar levels of fruiting trees. So this was suggesting that there wasn't a loss of these animal dispersers of these fruit species. And it also suggests that there's not going to be sort of cascading loss of these seed and fruit resources in the future for wildlife that depend on them. So this is all great information, but it was, a little bit contrary to some of the expectations that I had about how selective logging would impact forests based on some of the literature that I read before I started my PhD. And so to look at what could be driving some of these patterns, I went to look at how seedling dynamics were being impacted in how changes in early life stages at germination, regeneration, seedling survival could be impacting the forest community and then affect some of these biodiversity and ecosystem services things as the forest recovers over time. So I was looking at in this piece of the research what drives patterns of seedling survival, growth, and regeneration in logged forests. And to look at this, I looked at these vegetation plots across this forest chronosequence. So vegetation plot network where I had these logging blocks that were different. The time since logging was different. So we had 80 total plots that we set up in 4 treatments. So we had this logged in 2008 treatment, a logged in 2018 treatment, a logged in 2020 treatment that was, this is a before and after treatment. So we had set up the plots in 2019. They logged this sort of blue section of plots in 2020, and then we went back and remeasured them in 2022. And then these green plots represent unlogged forest plots here. And we measured seedlings, saplings, and adults in all the plots. For these analyses, I'm just looking at the seedlings, which were in these yellow subplots all throughout each vegetation plot. And as I said, we completed our initial vegetation census in 2019. I was able to complete the recensus in 2022. And I measured a couple of different forest characteristics that I thought might change due to logging. So things like deadwood and logging damage, things like light levels, and also animal trails. And I have a couple of pictures just to show you why I think some of those things might change in a log forest, because I think, I don't know if everyone on the call has been in a forest, in an African tropical forest, or has been in a log forest, but I always find pictures to be much more clear than, describing it. And so if you were to walk around in these log forests like I did during my PhD, you would be able to see that patterns of logging disturbance and patterns of elephant disturbance can be kind of similar, but at much different spatial and temporal scales. So both of these photos here represent logging disturbance. And on the left, you have a big treefall gap, which has this big light gap here, which is letting in a lot of light in the forest. And it's allowing all of this herbaceous stuff to regenerate in the understory of the log forest, which makes for really tasty food for things like elephants and other large mammals. And then also you can see this logging trail or skid trail, which is where they come in with machines into the forest to drag the trees, the timber trees that they've cut up out of the forest and onto the road so that they can be transported to the capital. And you can see on these logging trails, the understory vegetation is relatively cleared. There's much fewer seedlings and saplings than you see in the forest that has not been touched by these machines over to the left in this photo. And then these photos show some elephant disturbance. And so elephants remove trees from a forest similar to how selective logging removes trees from the forest, but they do it again in a much less disturbance heavy way. So they are not removing these large sized timber trees and clearing paths with machines through the forest, but they do damage or remove selected plant species that they preferentially eat, and they trample or break saplings on elephant trails as they walk through the forest. So this is an example, if you can see here, this elephant trail, like the previous photo that I showed, there's much fewer seedlings and saplings on this elephant trail, but it's much, much, much smaller than the skid trails are in the forest. And so you can see how that might have an impact on understory vegetation. Also, another really interesting thing that elephants do that might impact some of the early stage dynamics in forests is they disperse seeds. So seeds of high carbon fruiting species in the forest. And this particular tree is one of those trees. This is wild African mango. And you can see this elephant trail leading up to it. And so the elephants will come down this trail, eat the fruits of that tree, and then continue on through the forest. And then they will transport those seeds away from the parent tree and defecate them where they have a better chance of germination and survival further away from the tree that they came from. And so based on some of these understory characteristics that I thought might change, I sort of divided this main research question into 3 different questions. So I wanted to know how logging impacts these 3 understory characteristics that I was interested in. So I want to know how logging impacts logging damage, light, and elephant trails across these different forests. I wanted to understand how logging damage, light, and elephant trails impacted seedling performance. And then I wanted to see how logging impacts seedling performance by comparing those different logged blocks to see how seedling dynamics was impacted before and after logging, and to see how long those effects lasted after logging activities ceased. And so to look at that first sub-question, I found that logging does impact these understory characteristics. So when we looked at the amount of dead wood and debris and logging damage that was present in the seedling plots, we found that this was much more present in the actively logged forest, the forest that was logged in 2020, the recently logged forest, the forest that was logged in 2018, and then the older logged forest, so the forest that was logged in 2008. And that sort of became less prevalent over time, but all of these were still statistically significantly more prevalent than any evidence of damage, natural damage that was occurring from just branch or tree fall that was naturally happening in the unlogged forest. And then we also found that light levels were greater in the actively logged forest and the recently logged forest, so up to 4 years post-logging. And we found that animal trails were more prevalent in older logged forests compared to the unlogged forest, which was interesting for me because I wasn't expecting the older forest to pop up here. But yeah, that's what we found. And then moving on to the second sub-question, we did find that understory characteristics impacted seedling performance. And so looking at the abiotic characteristics first, we found that survival and growth survival was lower and then growth was higher in seedling plots that had logging or vegetation damage inside them. We also found that seedling plots with higher light levels had lower seedling survival. And I think that what's happening here is, the places where you would find this logging and vegetation damage are the places where there's tree and branch fall. And those are also the places where there's higher light levels in the forest. And so this is sort of representing the fact that those two things are spatially correlated when we're looking at these in the seedling plots. So that was great. Abiotic characteristics impact seedling performance. And then looking at these animal trails or the elephant trails, we found that they had lower seedling survival on elephant trails and higher seedling recruitment on animal trails. So this is sort of representing both the trampling that you would see on those trails and the seed dispersal that you would see from the animals that use those trails, which is great. And then looking at how logging impacts seedling performance, we found that logging impacted seedling survival, growth, and recruitment. And so seedling survival and recruitment were lower in logged forests up to 4 years post-logging compared to unlogged forests. And growth was higher in forests immediately after logging and also 14 years after logging compared to unlogged forests. And conclusions to wrap up this piece. I found that log forests have important differences in these understory characteristics such as animal trails, deadwood and debris, and light levels. I also found that these three characteristics all impacted seedling performance. And we also found that selective logging had the strongest impact on seedling performance up to 4 years post-logging. And so what this kind of represents to me is that we can see this signature of selective logging that's due to temporary changes in the abiotic understory conditions of forest. And these abiotic changes are the things that impact seedling dynamics the most post-logging. It was also really interesting that we found this impact of elephant trails. I didn't really set out to study the impact of elephant trails when I set up this study, but I thought that was just such an interesting result, and it made me realize how between, even the logged and unlogged forests, there's this much smaller scale variation going on between the forests where there's elephant trails and where there are not elephant trails. And we don't really have a good sense of what the baseline dynamics are in these forests due to things like large animals. So when we're doing comparisons between logged and unlogged forests, things like elephant trails might be varying, and that can also have an impact on the seedling dynamics in these forests. And yeah, this was the end of my PhD work, but I'm hoping to go back to Gabon and maybe expand my research to other sites in the future to study where and how both natural and anthropogenic disturbance impacts these things like forest structure and dynamics in Congo Basin forests that makes them, really unique and interesting. So yeah, I think that's it for me. If you guys have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Yeah, thank you so much, Megan. That was really interesting. So I welcome people to put comments into the chat, and you can also raise your hand on the hand icon and ask a question directly. I can kick off right now. I have a question for you. I'm curious how you measured the seedling growth rates and like how frequently, and because I saw, you had quite a few years of data. How did you measure that?
Yeah, we just measured it in the initial census. I measured the height of them, and then I measured the height again when I came back after 3 years. The initial idea was to go back either sooner or more frequently, but then of course COVID happened in 2020 and I couldn't get back until 2022. But there was interestingly a bit of negative growth in there, which I thought was interesting because it could be either representing like herbivory of the seedlings by some of those animals, or it could be, representing some kind of damage that happened because of the tree and branch fall from logging. But I sort of wasn't able to, suss out all of those different patterns. But yeah, I think some more frequent measurements there would really help tease apart those things.
Anybody else have any other questions? I have another question while we're waiting for some. Today I was just meeting with this researcher from this big project we have starting on social ecological restoration in Rwanda. Mm-hmm. And one of the things he was saying about his reflections on visiting restoration sites in Rwanda for forest restoration sites, the forest restoration is really thought of replanting timber concession sites. And here, as you know, like logging for timber is not done on native species. And so we have another project in the center where we're looking at the potential to use native trees for logging. But I'm just wondering, based on what you know about the species that were logged, like the things that are important, what everyone says about why no native species are used here, so everything is planted with eucalyptus or pine, is because they're fast growing and they have the quality of wood that people want for timber. So based on what you learned from your work with the timber harvesting, because I saw it's a very low harvest rate, and it must be that they're maybe going in there, I don't know if that's annually or what, and then what they're using it for. Could that be possible here to start using native species?
Yeah, I would have to know more, a little, ask a few questions, I think, about what the growth rates and logging cycles are like for the non-native species. Because in Gabon, they have the timber species aren't all hardwoods. That was one of the other interesting things that came out when I was looking at some of these functional ecosystem services analyses. So they had a bunch of early successional trees that they log in Gabon. And the tree that is most commonly logged, I think in this logging concession that I was in, it was 60% of the stems that was logged is a fast-growing early successional species that requires a lot of light, so kind of these larger, more open environments. And I think most people are using that to produce plywood. So it's not a, you know what I mean, what you typically think of as like these tropical hardwood species, which are, I mean, you know, you can make beautiful things from those hardwood species and stuff like that. But I think it does sort of show that if you're not targeting only those hardwood species, you can still, I mean, all of these businesses are making a profit and stuff like that. So you can still do some type of logging that is sustainable in terms of both economics and the regeneration of that species in the forest, because those species are then able to regenerate in those logging gaps that have a lot of light. But yeah, that particular species, it's early successional, but the logging cycle is on like a 25-year cycle, which is supposed to allow the younger trees that have been in the understory to sort of grow up and become timber sized. So I'm not sure at what age they harvest, you know, the pine and the eucalyptus species and stuff like that. But it could be worth looking into some of the information that they have on species in Gabon and how that compares to the native species that you guys have here in Rwanda.
Yeah, that would be really interesting, especially looking at wood quality and other characteristics. Yeah. So other questions or comments for Megan? People seem very quiet today. Yeah. No other questions or comments?
I can make a comment if no one else is going to make a comment. One of the really interesting things. So I didn't look at any of these patterns in the saplings yet, but I also have data about like sapling growth and things that recruited into the sapling layer and mortality across these logged forests. But also it was really interesting, like when we went back, there are a couple of areas in the forest where we had these 20 by 20 meter plots, and I think in at least one of them almost an entire 10 by 10 meter subplot where I was measuring the saplings, almost all of the saplings were gone from that. And that was not because of logging, but it was because it looked like elephants had come across this, area of forest. And I don't know exactly what they were doing there, but they had, pulled up some of the trees by their roots and really cleared this area in the understory, a much larger area than I thought they would.
That's interesting.
Yeah, you could really see like some of the seedlings, even you would find them like they would be missing, and then we'd find them pulled up with the root, exposed with the seedling tag still attached to it further down an elephant trail. And so you could really see like these elephants they're actively, people talk about elephants as gardeners of the Congo Basin forest. And you can really see they're even pulling stuff up and using that to shape the forest environment around them. So I just thought it was really fascinating.
It was very interesting. Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Thank you again, Megan. I really hope we get a chance to talk with you more about the particular project about the native trees and the timber industry work we're doing, because I think a lot of what you did is really informative for that. So I will have a seminar again next week, same time and place. And thank you, Vinant, for organizing the seminar. And thanks again, Megan, for taking your time.
Of course.
And for being here with us. Yeah. And have a great day, everybody. And we'll see you. Bye.
Bye bye.
Okay. Bye bye.